PlanetSide 2 compiled thoughts February 18th on Zerging, the new light machine guns, and the Commissioner. Just as an aside, I've played a total of 15 hours of PlanetSide 2 for the month of February, down from 31 hours in January. Until this week, I've tried to get in maybe an hour a day, but even in these hour-long play sessions, I'm really struggling to find anything remotely enjoyable in terms of gameplay. As it stands now, I can find one or two 96 plus fights, sometimes three. Now, if you want to have some kind of standards to gameplay in a shooter game, like acceptable hit reg, proper performance, and those types of things, these 2 or 3 fights available basically preclude me from participating. Sometimes, though, I force it and I still go into them, and it's always the same. One blob on one side of a choke point against another blob on the other side of a choke point. Scattered about are seemingly dozens of body-shotting BR-5 snipers, a smattering of air-to-ground vehicles that no teammates ever meaningfully interact with, some kind of armor piece on a hill 150 to 300 meters away just left-clicking in your general direction. It seems like that 99% of the player base in this game is content and perfectly happy sitting on their one side of the doorway, mindlessly mouse-wanting and grenade spamming the other side. I very rarely ever see anyone attempt to flank, and even if they did, and I certainly see this when I attempt, there's always at least one motion spotter, if not 2 or 3 in this kind of fight. Motion spotters were nerfed, yes, but the function is still essentially the same as it was in its overpowered, unnerfed state. The motion spotter by itself stagnates the flow of this game, and a skilled gameplay action is completely negated by the press and deploy of one button. So you basically have two choices. You either fight a Zerg, or you sit in a Zerg. There seems to be no in-between any longer, and both are suboptimal in terms of delivering a satisfying experience. There quite simply are zero penalties for just dumping population into a fight. An overwhelming behemoth of population has no common sense force multiplier restrictions, no loss of mobility, no loss of respawn time. Don't forget to mention that just having all those people in one area completely shits on basically everyone's PC, except for a tiny few. This is awful, stale, and stagnant gameplay. So, I play Hearts of Iron 4 from time to time, and it's a real-time strategy game with, like, set in World War II armies and everything like that. And a good comparison comes to mind from playing that game. Take, for example, I'm playing as the Soviet Union. It's about 1941 or 1942, and I've usually put together a nice 200 division, 2 to 5 million man army at this point. This will generally dwarf every other military in the game at this point outside of the German military. However, a problem comes with having an army this size. If I have too many units in and around a singular area of the front line, I start to have supply problems and movement problems. Oftentimes, I build and maintain an army that, while grand in scale, ultimately still suffers in some way from its size. I can sit and defend an area of land with this blob, but it becomes a huge problem when I start to try and push forwards with it. Supply penalties, movement penalties because of unit width. Ultimately, I still usually end up winning because of the superior tech and the numbers, but by the time my 3 to 5 million man army starts advancing, I've already camped a defensive line and killed 50 to 70% of the German fighting force. But big blobs of population still have downsides to them. In PlanetSide 2, there isn't a single downside or mechanic aimed at de-incentivizing Zerging. As long as it stays that way, the game will remain a niche, sub-10,000 player concurrent game. It turns out that people don't want to play in unfair matchups. There has to be some common sense here. I saw that idiot Nick Silva commenting about how they don't want to be, and I quote, heavy-handed when it comes to addressing Zergs, but please, Nick, you have to at least have attempted anything at all for me to label it heavy-handed. You haven't raised a finger to the problem, and by all accounts, this is an incentivized way to play your game. It's developer endorsed. So I'm going to talk briefly about the LMGs that came out this month. and give relevant stats for them that I've accumulated. Like I said, I've been playing less, but when I did play this month, it was with these new weapons. It's basically the entire impetus for me playing this month. So the torque, I played with the torque for about an hour and a half of total gameplay time. I shot 33% accuracy, 37 headshot rate for 4.5 KD, 100 kills per hour. If you aren't a potato, what did I call it? The torque? Oh my god, it's the Watchman. So the Watchman, alright, it's a torqued LMG. If you aren't a potato, this gun has very negligible spread and recoil in the ranges that you should be using it in, which is 15 meters and in, because you should have soft point. If you're positionally challenged or don't have the brain power to not try and fight people from 0 to 70 with every gun, please don't use this weapon. It's an interesting option, but with how limiting and poor it feels at anything beyond 15 meters, I can't see it replacing the MSW for standard play. It's probably a tiny pubic hair too accurate too, within 15 meters, but overall, it's in a fine spot, again, if you're just average and have some common sense with target range. The Promise. I played with this gun for 1.4 hours, shot 38, 35, 5.4 KD, 97 kills per hour. This gun I have a lot more to say about. When it first came out, your average mouth breather NC main did nothing but cry about how it was, and I quote, so bad. The next day, there's a Devastator post on Reddit about a conversation he had with Rel about how the gun has built-in, hidden, like, negative spread mechanics, similar to that other rather useless NSX weapon that I can't be bothered to remember the name of. All of a sudden, I kept reading about how this was a suppressive support LMG that everyone had been pining for so long. Much to my fascination, I can still find people that think that some kind of suppression exists in this game. And even more hilariously, it can be achieved by one man with one gun. Basically, the way spread increase per shot works, if I ever end up in a fight where I hear some guy holding his mouse 1 at a doorway thinking he's suppressing it, I know I already have a free kill just by walking in, right-clicking, and left-clicking. His gun has bloomed so hard that he can no longer hit anything. This is how every single automatic weapon in the game functions. Except for that stupid NSX gun, and I call it stupid simply because you can't move at all when using it, which is stupid, and this by itself makes it unusable. Now, this new Promise gun has some type of inverse conifire bloom mechanic that leaves it pretty accurate when you just mag dump it. Fine. It still doesn't make it have any special power of suppression, and it still takes an eternity to kill someone based on its 143 damage model out to only 10 meters. I keep reading about this gun being a point holder or some shit as well. Repeat after me. Every weapon in the game is a point holder. Also repeat after me. There is no such thing as suppression in this game from one gun and one player. It does not magically make you into this. Yes, you can hold mouse 1 and be accurate at an area of a room. Unfortunately, most people can't track once a target is actually into the room and you're still running at 698 rate of fire with 143 damage out to 10 meters, whereas more realistically, you'll be hitting for 125 in this situation across a big-ass room at a doorway. So you're still going to take an eternity to kill someone that isn't standing right in front of you and not moving. Another point of masturbation over the gun seems to be its ability to get up to 687 velocity with that one ammo attachment where you lose 25 rounds of your magazine. This by itself makes the gun a, quote, long-range support LMG, except for the fact that, damage drop-off is a thing and most people are horribly inaccurate, especially people that talk about suppression in PlanetSide 2. Now, one person actually went as far as to say that any weapon below 600 velocity was basically pleb tier and not worth using. Oh boy. Let's talk about projectile velocity for a second here. In infantry combat in this game, I would contest that most relevant infantry gunfights occur in and around objective buildings. This makes sense to me. While I don't have access to the actual numbers, I would hypothesize that roughly 70 to 80% of all relevant gunfighting takes place within 10 to 20 meters. At these ranges, projectile velocity between the 500 and 600 meter per second varieties achieve relative parity. Yes, the 600 meter per second velocity weapon projectiles get to the target faster, obviously. But the difference in time from a 600 plus velocity projectile and one in the 500s is beyond negligible. We're talking actually less than a tenth of 1 second difference. Is there an argument for having higher velocity for further ranges being more beneficial? Yes. I don't contest this. All I'm saying here is that in the most common and relevant ranges where gunfighting probably actually takes place in the game, 600 meter per second weapons and 500 meter per second weapons achieve relative parity, and anyone stating otherwise is looking for jerk-off material for their 600 plus weapon. As for what I think about the promise, I think in general, I just hate the 143 damage model and hate guns even more that use it and also fall off after 10 meters. Sure, it's accurate. It will appeal to bad players that want to use a dumb mechanic of just holding mouse 1 and staying accurate. It's not a game changer by any stretch of the saying, and overall it's pretty underwhelming when compared to the other options you have as an NC heavy assault. Last but not least, the Maul. I played with for 1.2 hours, shot 3441, 4.6 KD, 107 kph. This is basically a Chinese knockoff of the Anchor. It feels worse than the Anchor, and I don't know why you'd use this gun besides to be different or to do directives. This one's going to be a lot shorter. Unstable ammo is still a dumb mechanic, and I'd rather see it removed from the game. Onto the Commissioner. A couple threads that I saw also popped up in the last couple weeks that reminded me how bad the sidearms are in this game in terms of balance. Here's how the balance of sidearms works in PlanetSide 2. You have the Commissioner, and then everything else. Ease of use, power, accuracy, all three combined into what is basically a primary weapon in the pistol spot. Now, what makes more sense here in an attempt to fix how awful the sidearms feel in this game? Are you going to adjust the elephant in the room that basically, because it exists, makes every other sidearm in the game irrelevant? Or are you just going to power creep up every other pistol in the game to be relevant? I think the choice here is an obvious one. The Commissioner has been the go-to, most obnoxious, and obvious secondary choice basically since it was released. I'm reminded of those gunfights I get into all the time where the guy I'm fighting has 20% accuracy on his full auto gun, misses 80% of his shots on me, and then usually, always without fail, panic swaps to his Commissioner so he even has a chance because of how idiotic that gun is. Why would you use anything else in this slot? On a side note, if there's ever anything in your game that's basically a no-brainer, and everyone uses it because really no other suit slot or weapon item even comes close, chances are that it's probably in an overpowered state. And yes, I'm talking about nanoweave armor. The Commissioner needs a longer draw time, worse vertical recoil, as well as needing to be less accurate from the hip. I'm fine with the damage model, it's just the damage model combined with ease of use that makes it such a no-brainer.